Scarlet sandstorms swept across the barren, bitterly cold land. The scorching air burned my skin. I collapsed to the ground, my body severely dehydrated and on the verge of death. After struggling through an entire lifetime of apocalypse, surviving extreme heat and evading mutated beasts, I ultimately fell at the hands of the two people I trusted most. All the survival supplies I had painstakingly stockpiled were stolen by my former best friend and ex-boyfriend, leaving me to die miserably in the desert. Bai Lian squatted in front of me, her tone seemingly gentle, but every word was laced with selfish indifference. Wan, don't be so selfish with the last bit of water.
Everyone is about to die of thirst. Don't keep it all to yourself.
A suffocating sense of impending death swept over my entire body. Using the last bit of my strength, I rasped out, "You will regret this." Utter despair dragged me into darkness. The next second, I jolted awake, gasping for breath. A cool, tidy apartment came into view. No crimson desert, no howling sandstorms. I quickly glanced at the calendar by my bed. Only 7 days remained until the apocalyptic solar storm. I raised my hand to touch my unscathed skin, a bone-chilling fear surging in my heart. I'm back. My mind unlocked my exclusive cheat, a climate-controlled portable space and underground bunker blueprints, all ready. Last time I was killed because of you. This time I won't be a victim. As I sorted my preparations for the disaster, my phone rang. It was Bai Lian. Staring at the name on the screen, coldness spread in my eyes. I murmured softly, "The real show is about to begin." The curtain has risen. In my previous life, my soft heart led to a tragic end. In this life, I will sever all false relationships and live only for myself. Having been reborn, I understand the cruelty of the apocalypse better than anyone. When disaster strikes, money and assets become worthless. Only supplies and a sturdy fortress are the true foundation for survival. Without any hesitation, I decided to liquidate all my assets and prepare for the end times. I opened the asset page on my phone. With a resolute gaze, I sold off my house, car, and all my investments at low prices. I wasn't looking to make a profit, only to cash out as quickly as possible. Before doomsday arrived, I needed enough funds to carve out a path for myself. My unusual actions were soon noticed by my parents. They rushed back to the apartment, and seeing me sell off everything I owned, looked at me in utter disbelief. My mother frowned deeply, her tone filled with confusion and anxiety. "Are you out of your mind? Why are you wasting money instead of living a good life?" My father looked stern, clearly disapproving of my decision, thinking I was just acting on a whim.
The weather is only occasionally hot. There's no such thing as a natural disaster coming. Stop this ridiculous behavior at once.
Hiding my rebirth, I calmly replied, "You just don't understand. Soon, everything changes. Before the disaster, warnings seem hollow. Explanations are seen as delusions." After reassuring my parents, I hired a secure construction firm. Since an ordinary basement won't survive the coming heat and storms, I ordered a triple-level bunker, kept strictly confidential. After hanging up the phone, I looked out at the peaceful cityscape, feeling an intense clarity deep inside. Chaos is coming, and people's hearts are unpredictable. Only an absolutely secure shelter can guarantee my survival. I muttered softly to myself, absolute safety is the only answer. Only after liquidating my assets can I survive the apocalypse. With funds in hand, I immediately start shopping. Vivid memories of starvation and thirst haunt me. I'll never suffer like that again. I stockpile essentials in massive quantities, bulk ordering online. I resolutely buy water, grains, oil, canned food, medicine, and climate gear, all the essentials for survival. Medical supplies, protective gear, temperature control, and storage containers, covering every survival scenario. I head to major wholesale markets to purchase and stockpile in bulk. My massive orders leave the vendors especially astonished. Looking at the mountain of orders, one vendor asks in confusion,
"Miss, will you be able to use all of this?"
I react calmly, shrugging it off.
"Just stocking up for emergencies."
I make a point to keep a low profile, never drawing attention to myself. I split up my orders to eliminate any risk of exposure, making sure that neighbors don't notice anything unusual. Supplies arrive steadily, one after another. Medicines, equipment, and tools are all sorted by category, neatly organized, and fully stocked. I store all the supplies into my portable space. The space maintains a constant temperature and keeps everything fresh, allowing for permanent preservation so nothing will spoil. Seeing the space filled to the brim with reserves, I finally feel at ease. In the apocalypse, human relationships are fragile, and order collapses. No one can be relied upon. I sigh softly to myself. Having ample supplies is the foundation for survival. With endless resources and a sturdy fortress, I now possess the means to withstand the scorched apocalypse. The commotion from my days of bulk purchasing and renovations couldn't be completely concealed. In just a few days, my unusual actions spread through the neighborhood, attracting the attention of Bai Lian and Chen Feng. Both are meticulous, greedy, and selfish, and like me, they have been reborn with memories of their previous lives. They immediately sensed something was off. That afternoon, the two of them came together under the pretense of a friendly visit, but in reality, they were here specifically to probe into my preparations. Bai Lian wore a gentle expression. She casually probed, Wan, you've been buying a lot lately, did you hear something? Her gaze betrayed her suspicion. Chen Feng quickly chimed in, acting like a concerned friend. We're friends. If something's up, don't forget us. They clearly just wanted to freeload off my doomsday supplies. I had already seen through their greedy intentions but kept a calm expression and replied in a detached, indifferent tone, I'm just making normal purchases. I deliberately downplayed my actions, not wanting them to figure out all my cards. Seeing that I was being evasive and secretive, Bai Lian's smile faded. She lowered her voice, her eyes filled with certainty and said, Stop pretending. You and I both remember the future. A chill surged in my heart, just as I had suspected. They were reborn too, and their closeness was a sham, just waiting for the right moment to scheme against me. From past betrayal to current probing, I saw through them completely. After sending Bai Lian and Chen Feng away, I focused on building the underground fortress. The private courtyard I bought was hidden and secluded, perfect for a doomsday bunker. My hired team arrived on time, equipped and experienced, following my blueprints. The foreman verified the plan details, 3 underground levels reinforced, insulated, waterproofed and powered per my specs. The plan accounted for every doomsday scenario, including extreme heat, sandstorms, and mutant attacks, ensuring safety. I knew the apocalypse's dangers exceed imagination, leaving no room for error. I immediately added another requirement, to build an additional outer protective wall, raise the height, and install early warning devices, reinforcing the defenses in every possible way to eliminate any risk of external intrusion. The foreman looked at the ever-increasing layers of protection, and couldn't help but question whether such strict measures were really necessary. To ordinary people it was just unusually hot weather. There was no need to go to such lengths to build top-level defenses. I remained calm and spoke with conviction. You'll soon see whether it's necessary or not. No one understands this better than I do. In just a few days, this place will become a living hell. As night falls, excavators work in the quiet courtyard, their roaring engines echoing. Construction of a 3-story, 3-room underground fortress, buried deep beneath the ground, officially begins. My doomsday defense line is taking shape, building a solid barrier against the chaos. Late at night, the constant noise of construction shatters the tranquility, drawing neighbors' attention. Rumors spread as everyone grows curious about my unusual actions. People don't understand. They think I'm wasting money and making a scene. Neighbors watch from windows, whispering about my late-night construction. Tensions rise as they watch with curiosity and envy. Naturally, Bai Lian and Chen Feng won't miss the chance to snoop. They sneak over at night to film. Bai Lian stares at the crew, her eyes full of suspicion and jealousy. I feel Su Wan is acting strange, secretly meeting in the basement. He must be stockpiling supplies. Chen Feng looked at the sturdy construction site, his eyes greedy. Cindy was already plotting to seize everything. When disaster strikes, his stuff will become ours. The two of them had already made up their minds, just waiting for the apocalypse to come so they could seize everything I have. Bai Lian composed herself, lowered her voice, and schemed, I'll keep watch first and wait for the right moment to act. The two of them worked together, continuing to secretly monitor my every move and constantly gathering information about me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Through the hidden surveillance in the courtyard, I saw their scheming but felt only coldness. I had already anticipated their greed. My defenses were ready. The main construction of the underground bunker was progressing steadily, while I improved outer defenses and gear. In this relentless apocalypse, disasters run rampant, and so does human greed. The attacks from mutated beasts are all deadly threats. Under the rule of no thermal weapons, compliant and cold-blooded protective equipment is the best guarantee for self-preservation. I scoured the entire city for labor protection pads, purchasing various compliant self-defense devices in bulk. As I selected protective gear in the store, my goals were clear and precise. Protective shields, alloy tools, emergency equipment, and high-voltage electric grids all were installed and ready. From close-range protective emergency tools to a city-wide electric grid warning system, I comprehensively addressed all defensive weaknesses. The store owner, seeing me purchase such a large quantity of protective equipment, couldn't help but comment, "These are all protective items. You really care about safety." To most people, these devices seem excessive and unnecessary to buy. I remained calm and replied evenly, "An age of chaos is coming. Self-defense is essential. Ordinary days of peace are about to end completely. Extreme disasters will tear apart all illusions of tranquility. Only by being fully prepared can one ensure their own survival." After completing the purchases, I arranged for the workers to expedite the installation and testing. All the high-voltage electric grid explosion-proof shield early warning devices were deployed around the perimeter of the courtyard, layered together with the fortress's first-level defenses, leaving no blind spots in the protection. With the final early warning device successfully tested, the first layer of the fortress's defense system was completely established. Looking at the comprehensive defense system, I quietly reassured myself, no one will be able to break in easily. The ongoing construction, continuous procurement of supplies, and large-scale equipment expenses quickly depleted my funds. My extremely unusual actions made my parents increasingly worried, and they repeatedly came to persuade me to stop. They tried stopping my preparations, thinking rumors misled me. They saw me wasting savings on something absurd. Seeing the constant construction, my mother pleaded regretfully, "Stop wasting money building this basement. It's such a waste." He always believed this extreme weather was just temporary, and there was no need for such great lengths. My father was even more serious, repeatedly trying to persuade me that it was just ordinary heat and I shouldn't let my imagination run wild. The two of them took turns trying to talk me out of it, wanting me to stop my preparations and return to our stable life. I couldn't explain being reborn or the truth about the apocalypse, so I just reassured them, "I know what I'm doing. You two just live your lives in peace. I'm fully aware of all the risks. I will bear all the consequences myself. I have long been prepared to risk everything." Faced with my parents' persistent persuasion, I neither argued nor compromised. After reassuring my parents, I left and returned to my room alone. Watching the steady progress of the fortress construction on the surveillance feed, my mind was filled with countless thoughts. I knew that no one could understand what I was doing. Everyone was living in the illusion of final peace. I whispered to myself, "I cannot reveal the truth. I can only silently protect everyone. I do not seek anyone's understanding. When doomsday comes, I just want to protect myself and survive." As the apocalypse neared, the city's weather turned abnormal. The mild climate vanished as temperatures soared, the air grew dry, and winds picked up. Stifling heat swept the city with an oppressive feeling. News outlets issued heat alerts, reminding citizens to stay cool. Warnings about the extreme heat echoed everywhere. Red alerts for extreme heat were issued, classified as a natural event. As the crisis approached, restless people on the streets complained of the unbearable heat, having never experienced weather like this. Everyone assumed it was a rare heat wave that would soon pass. I stood by the window, feeling the air grow hotter and drier, watching people go about their lives in indifference. These patterns heralded the solar storm, the prelude to doomsday, I whispered softly. The signs have already appeared, and doomsday is drawing ever closer. Looking up at the horizon, I saw the sunset lose its warm hues, the entire sky covered by an eerie crimson glow, creating an oppressive atmosphere. The crimson clouds stretched across the sky, heralding the end of an era of peace and stability. I clenched my fists, preparing for the final battle. There are only 3 days left to get everything ready. The stable civilization that belongs to humanity is about to collapse completely. With just 3 days remaining until doomsday, chaos is beginning to emerge in the city, and people's hearts are growing restless. Bailian saw things getting worse and couldn't hold back. He asked to meet me alone to come clean. He knew their meager supplies wouldn't sustain them in this apocalypse. They needed my help to survive. To share my vast resources and sturdy fortress. After we met, Bailian stopped pretending. She was blunt and straightforward, her calculating gaze revealing her intentions as she laid everything out. "We're both reborn, so why not join forces to stockpile supplies and survive together?" She thought this was a win-win solution, convinced that I couldn't survive alone. Looking at the face that had been so fake for years, all I felt was a cold disgust. I refused her without hesitation. I don't need a partner. Before, joining them led to a grim end. Now, I'll never side with them again. Seeing my resolve, Bailian's expression soured. She threatened, "Don't be ungrateful. You won't last long alone." She tried to force my dependence. Past betrayals surged in my mind. My gaze turned icy, and I said firmly, "In my previous life, you all betrayed me. In this life, we can only be enemies." As soon as I finished speaking, the last layer of fake friendship between us was completely shattered. There was no need for pretense, no need for pleasantries. From this moment on, Bailian, Zhenfeng and I had completely torn off our masks and become sworn enemies in the apocalypse, locked in direct confrontation. As the doomsday countdown kept ticking down, the construction of my 3-level underground fortress was finally completed. After days of rushed work and repeated adjustments, the entire fortress was perfectly fitted with insulation layers. Weatherproofing, insulation, temperature controls, water recycling, solar power, and isolation mechanisms were all tested and running smoothly. Living, storage, farming, and defense zones were orderly and comprehensive. Final inspections were reported. The underground fortress was finished. The temperature control, water purification, power, and isolation systems were all functioning normally. The fortress was as solid as a rock, capable of withstanding extreme heat, sandstorms, and intrusions. I nodded, my expression calm. After paying the remaining balance and dismissing the crew to ensure total secrecy, I walked into the deep underground fortress alone as the heavy alloy hatch slowly closed behind me. All sounds and heat from the outside world were completely shut out. The moment the hatch locked, the restless and oppressive atmosphere outside vanished entirely. Inside the fortress, the temperature was just right, the lighting was steady, and the equipment operated in perfect order, a stark contrast to the strange, stifling heat outside. I looked around, feeling an unparalleled sense of peace. I whispered to myself, cut off from the world, this is my doomsday safe house. Whatever storms rage outside have nothing to do with me. From now on, this underground fortress would be my only safe haven in the scorched apocalypse. There were only 2 days left until doomsday arrived. The weather outside grew increasingly extreme and scorching, with frequent gales and sporadic small-scale water and power outages began to appear in the city. It's just that ordinary people have yet to sense the crisis, thinking these are merely equipment malfunctions. I seized the last bit of time to check for any gaps, wrap up all my preparations, and shore up every weakness to ensure nothing could go wrong. Food, medicine, and protective gear had long been stocked in abundance, so I shifted my focus to long-term survival supplies, placing large orders for fruit and vegetable seeds, organic fertilizers, equipment consumables, backup storage batteries, and repair parts. This ensured the fortress was self-sufficient and could run long-term. Days of large deliveries familiarized the courier with my address. Each time he delivered, he remarked, "You have big parcels every day." I replied that all supplies must be stored and organized together. Supplies arrived in batches and were stashed in my personal space, never exposed to the outside. In 2 days it was packed with essentials, clothing, food, medical and energy supplies. Everything needed to live alone, safely for years. After finishing all orders and equipment debugging, the buying spree finally ended. Outside, small-scale water and power outages began. Order was already collapsing. I stayed inside my fortress, waiting calmly for the apocalypse with my supplies. On the final day, an extreme heat wave broke the city's water system. The scorching sun damaged pipes and the equipment failed. There was a citywide outage. Not a single drop came from any tap. For the first time, the city faced a massive resource crisis, and water panic instantly threw all residents into chaos. People rushed out of their homes to buy drinking water. Anxious residents could be seen everywhere on the streets, with cries of alarm rising one after another. The water's been cut off, there's not a drop left at home. All the major supermarkets were instantly packed with crowds, and the shelves of drinking water were cleared out in no time. With supplies scarce, prices soared rapidly. Supermarket owners took the opportunity to raise prices, coldly informing everyone that prices had tripled and that there wasn't much stock left. Despite soaring prices, people scrambled for the remaining water, fighting over scarce supplies. Chaos was everywhere. Neighborly bonds vanished in the panic of survival. Watching the city's chaos via surveillance, seeing order collapse, I felt nothing. Civilization is fragile. One disaster can tear apart all tranquility. I murmured, order is collapsing. The apocalypse has begun. Before the worst hit, unprepared people were already desperate. With no water, prices soared and panic spread. Like others, Bai Lian and Chen Feng waited too long to buy supplies. Now, short on cash as prices skyrocket, they can only afford scraps in supermarket corners. They scrambled for cheap supplies. Facing empty shelves, Bai Lian felt anxious and frustrated. Lacking funds, they grabbed the cheapest items. Seeing others fight for goods, envy filled his eyes. He thought of my massive stockpile with regret and remorse. If only he had cashed out earlier. But there is no cure for regret. Now, he passively accepted the shortage. Both were hot and exhausted. In contrast, I had prepared everything, leaving me deeply satisfied. This completely gave rise to vicious thoughts. Bai Lian's eyes turned sinister as she whispered her plan. It's fine. Su Wan has plenty of supplies. Once the disaster fully breaks out, we'll just go and take them. Chen Feng immediately agreed, and the two of them hit it off right away. Driven by desperation and greed, they abandoned the last shreds of their dignity and made up their minds. Once the apocalypse truly arrived and order completely collapsed, they would come to my place and seize all my supplies. Watching their ugly, greedy faces, I coldly observed everything through the surveillance cameras, my heart turning icy cold. As night fell, the last vestiges of peace came to a complete end. A sudden intense solar storm swept across the globe, delivering a devastating blow. The city's power grid instantly collapsed, all lights went out, and everything was plunged into darkness. Communication base stations were damaged, cell phone signals became intermittent, and most electronic devices failed completely and were rendered useless. The screens on the streets that had been broadcasting warning news suddenly went black. All official alerts were completely cut off, and there was no longer any information to calm the public's panic. The surface temperature continued to soar at a terrifying rate, and scorching hot winds swept through the entire city. I stood by the window, watching the world suddenly change, my expression calm and composed. The disaster I had been waiting for so many days had finally arrived as expected. I spoke softly. The solar storm is here. Reaching out, I pulled open the curtains. The entire sky was shrouded in crimson, and fierce winds carrying dry hot air swept across the land. The world changed color, and desolation was everywhere. The once bustling city instantly lost all signs of life. Only a desolate silence remained. Watching crimson storms and empty streets, I felt a clarity within. Humanity's catastrophe had begun. I whispered, "The scorched earth apocalypse is here." Disaster struck and order collapsed. Peace and civilization vanished, leaving only the cruel law of survival. After the solar storm, the surface of the earth became a living hell. The extreme heat and scorching sunlight pushed outdoor temperatures to the limits of human endurance. Just a few minutes of exposure to the air would cause symptoms such as heat stroke, dehydration, and burns. On the streets, it was common to see people who had collapsed from the heat or fallen unconscious from dehydration, but no one had the strength to help them. The relentless heat and drought dried up the rivers completely. All the greenery along the streets withered and died, the ground cracked and peeled, and the entire city turned into a vast scorched wasteland. Meanwhile, environmental mutations gave rise to docile beasts appearing sporadically throughout the city, worsening the chaos. Every household kept their doors and windows tightly shut, fearing to step out. Without power, water, or food, the unbearable heat and scarcity completely shattered the psychological defenses of ordinary people. Trapped survivors despaired, lamenting, "No water or power, how can we survive?" Unprotected ordinary people were trapped, enduring natural disasters. I stood by the window, looking at the devastated city and despairing survivors, feeling calm. Bustling civilization seems solid, but it is fragile. Facing extreme disasters, humanity is powerless. I sighed inwardly. Civilization is utterly vulnerable when confronted with catastrophic disasters. Outside, the scorching heat surged, sandstorms raged, chaos was everywhere, and danger lurked in every corner. I didn't relax for a moment. I immediately closed all entrances and exits to the courtyard, locked the explosion-proof doors, and activated all the outer defense systems. The high-voltage electric grid and warning devices were fully on standby, cutting off all external threats. After completing all the external defenses, I turned and walked into the underground bunker. The heavy alloy hatch slowly closed behind me, completely sealing off the surface heat and chaos. On the surface, fierce winds howled as sand and dust relentlessly battered the courtyard walls. The scorching air currents enveloped the entire courtyard, and the hellish scene continued to unfold. But inside the bunker, it was a completely different scene. The temperature control system operated steadily, keeping the indoor temperature comfortable and pleasant. The energy storage devices provided continuous power, the lights were bright and warm, and the air circulation system kept the air fresh inside. There was no heat, no sandstorms, just peace and a sense of healing. All the natural disasters and human suffering outside were completely shut out, unable to disturb my sanctuary in the slightest. I sat on the soft seat inside the bunker, enjoying a rare moment of peace in these chaotic times. The stark contrast between the inside and outside filled me with countless emotions. Stability comes from confidence gained through preparation. I whispered, "Outside is hell, but here is my sanctuary. Peace is now the greatest luxury." After days of catastrophe, food and water vanished, the heat wave raged, and supplies were depleted, making survival harder. Bai Lian and Chen Feng had long since run out of ammunition and food, tormented by hunger and thirst. With nowhere else to turn, they pinned all their hopes on me. They knew very well that I had prepared in advance, with ample supplies and an intact courtyard, the only lifeline in the entire area. So, the two of them incited a group of desperate neighbors to band together and come to the gate of my courtyard, frantically pounding on the door and launching a clumsy attempt at moral coercion. Bai Lian stood at the very front, her voice hoarse as she cried out, "Su Wan, open the door, we're dying of thirst." The surrounding neighbors all chimed in, following suit and crying out, trying to use public pressure to force me to open the door. "We're all neighbors, you can't just stand by and watch us die." Everyone simply took it for granted that I was obligated to provide for them for free. Chen Feng stood among the crowd, pretending to be sincere, but in reality, he was selfish and greedy. Give up some supplies and save everyone. They used the excuse of saving people, but in reality, they just wanted to seize my supplies to protect themselves. I sat in front of the fortress's surveillance screens, clearly watching the greedy and hypocritical faces of the people outside my door, expressionless and unmoved in the slightest. In my previous life, I was soft-hearted and kind, helping everyone, but in the end, all I got in return was betrayal and death. A coldness spread in my eyes as I murmured to myself, "When you all harmed me back then, you never thought of showing any mercy. Since they were so heartless and ungrateful before, they don't deserve my kindness now." The constant cries and moral coercion had no effect. The courtyard gate remained tightly shut, and I showed no sign of opening it. The people outside the gate ran out of patience, their greed for survival overwhelmed what little reason they had left, completely exposing their ugly true nature. No longer pretending to be kind, they all stepped forward to violently kick the door and ram the walls, trying to forcefully break into the courtyard and seize the supplies inside. A crowd gathered at the entrance, frantically destroying the outer facilities, their resentment overflowing. As the violent destruction continued, the high-voltage electric fence around the courtyard was successfully triggered. Blue sparks flashed, and several people at the front were instantly thrown back by a powerful jolt, their skin slightly burned. They fell to the ground in a sorry state, crying out in pain. The sudden electric shock caught everyone off guard. They all retreated, not daring to approach recklessly again. Balian looked utterly stunned, staring at the courtyard wall in disbelief. How does this house still have protection? The crowd retreated in embarrassment, their bodies aching all over. All their greed turned into intense resentment, yet they didn't dare to launch another attack. I watched their embarrassed and frustrated expressions through the surveillance cameras, my face cold as I whispered each word. If you dare cross the line, don't blame me for showing no mercy. My defenses never actively harm anyone, but I will never tolerate those who cross the line out of greed. After their failed assault, the crowd could only disperse resentfully, yet they remained trapped in a desperate situation. The catastrophe dragged on for days. The entire city was completely cut off from water and food supplies. The scorching heat never relented, and residents without reserves had lost all means of survival, struggling on the brink of life and death every day. In such an extreme predicament, all kindness in human nature vanished, while selfishness and greed were magnified without limit. Years of neighborly bonds were rendered meaningless. For half a bottle of water or a small piece of food, people fought each other, scrambling and coming to blows. The once harmonious streets and alleys had completely turned into battlegrounds. The weak, the elderly, and children, unable to compete for supplies, could only curl up at home, enduring the heat and hunger, struggling desperately. Despair had completely engulfed the entire city. No one was willing to give way. No one was willing to help each other. Everyone was resorting to any means necessary just to survive. Balian, overheated and dehydrated, huddled miserably in a corner of the stairwell. Her face was haggard and cracked, bearing no trace of her former delicate and pretentious appearance. Chen Feng was just as wretched, physically and mentally exhausted, his eyes filled with despair. He looked at the endless hopelessness before him, his heart full of regret and anxiety. If this goes on, sooner or later we'll starve to death. But even knowing the outcome, they were completely helpless. They could only endure. Watching the city's inhuman chaos via surveillance, I felt a profound clarity. The worst part of disasters isn't the heat or sand, but the ugliness of human nature. Outside, panic and fighting reigned as everyone risked their lives for basic survival, struggling on the edge of death. Yet, inside my underground fortress, everything remained calm and peaceful, a world of vitality and purity all its own. For long-term survival and self-sufficiency, I started the fortress's climate-controlled greenhouse, using the seeds and organic fertilizers I had prepared. I prepped soil, sowed, and nurtured seeds, managed climate, and tending each one. The fortress's recycling system runs 24/7, filtering wastewater for reuse and meeting all water needs. Self-sufficient water resources replenish continuously. Energy storage powers the system, maintaining lighting and climate control. Soon, the greenhouse turned lush, and seedlings thrived. Food, water, and energy are all internally recycled, with no need to rely on any external resources. Seeing the flourishing plants in the greenhouse and the smoothly operating survival systems, I felt an overwhelming sense of security. In chaotic times, relying on others will only lead to betrayal and death. I sighed softly, realizing that even without the outside world, I could survive for a long time. Only by being self-sufficient can one take control of their own fate. A truly self-sustaining cycle gives me the confidence to survive indefinitely in the apocalypse. As the apocalypse intensifies, the surface becomes harsher, with rising heat and drought and ecosystems collapsing. Due to the extreme conditions, more and more mutated creatures are appearing in the wilderness outside the city, and the crisis keeps escalating. Mutated sandworms lurk beneath the cracked earth, moving stealthily and attacking with great ferocity. All kinds of small mutated beasts frequently appear in the city streets and alleys, wandering around in search of food. Survivors who venture out alone to gather supplies are repeatedly attacked by these mutated creatures, and the number of injured and missing people keeps rising. Resource scarcity is now compounded by mutant beast invasions. People fear leaving home. Day brings scorching heat, night brings mutant beasts. The city is full of deadly threats. Lethal heat, roaming beasts, and zero supplies remain. The once bustling city has now become a dangerous forbidden zone. Just stepping outside your door could mean facing deadly peril. I watch the mutant beasts roaming the streets and alleys through the outdoor surveillance cameras, observing the increasingly perilous surface environment. I stay constantly alert, not daring to relax for even a moment. I quietly remind myself, the number of mutant beasts is growing and the danger is still escalating. I must be even more cautious. In these chaotic times, crises keep piling up. Only by being extremely cautious can one hope to survive for long. The ongoing desperate situation and the mutant beast crisis have left the surrounding neighbors completely at their wits' end. Everyone is on the verge of dying from thirst or hunger. Driven by an intense will to survive, they once again set their sights on the intact and well-stocked courtyard. Bai Lian keenly seized on everyone's survival instincts and began stirring up trouble everywhere. She roamed the halls spreading rumors and discord among the neighbors. She accused me in front of them, saying Suwan was hoarding supplies and letting others die. She insisted I could have helped, but instead left us to die. The neighbors, already on the brink of despair, were completely incited by her words. The greed and resentment in their hearts erupted fully. Someone loudly echoed, "As long as we break into her home, we'll have water and food." Everyone was overwhelmed by their survival instincts and jealousy. Completely losing all reason, they banded together, gathered people, and coordinated their plan. They decided to launch a full assault on the courtyard late at night when the temperature dropped and visibility was low, to break in and seize the supplies. A group of ordinary people on the verge of desperation prepared themselves, harboring obsessive greed and ready to strike at any moment. They thought that, with their numbers, they would surely be able to break into my courtyard and seize the supplies I depended on to survive, but they had no idea that my defenses were already impenetrable. The covert surveillance system I installed covered every area inside and outside the courtyard, leaving no blind spots. As the neighbors gathered outside the gate and Bai Lian incited the crowd, I watched the entire process of their secret plot to launch an assault, seeing everything, missing nothing. Watching the group on the screen, driven by greed and scheming together against me, I felt nothing in my heart, only indifference remained. Ever since they first came to my door trying to morally coerce me, I had already anticipated everyone's greed and calculations. I no longer harbored any goodwill or expectations and immediately set about reinforcing my defenses. The heavy alloy hatch was double-locked, all warning devices in the yard were fully activated, the high-voltage grid was turned up to maximum power, and the courtyard's defenses were reinforced on all fronts, ready for anything. They foolishly tried to rely on their numbers to launch a violent assault and seize my means of survival, unaware that I had already made thorough preparations and was waiting for them to come. No matter their numbers, it is futile against solid defenses. I watched the fully armed group on the surveillance feed, my gaze cold. If you want death, I'll teach you a lesson. I sat by the monitors, calmly waiting for the enemy to arrive. Human greed knows no bounds and scheming never ceases. Only by staying tough and protecting oneself can one survive chaotic times. The night grew deep, and the surface temperature dropped slightly, making it the perfect time for everyone to launch their planned assault. In the dead of night, Balian led a group of neighbors to quietly approach the perimeter of the courtyard. Everyone was armed with makeshift tools, poised and ready to strike. Accompanied by faint noises, the group began climbing over walls, smashing doors, and battering the courtyard fence, using every possible means to violently break through the defenses in an attempt to force their way inside. Desperate for supplies, the crowd hoped to escape their situation. But my multi-layered defense was no show. The reinforced walls and explosion-proof fixtures held firm. Their violent attempts failed, repeatedly triggering the high-voltage grid and alarms. Alarms pierced the night as the grid sparked. Those at the front were shocked and thrown back, burned and in total disarray. Everyone took turns trying every method, but they couldn't break through the layers of defenses. They gained nothing, and most left injured, looking quite battered and miserable. The prolonged assault ultimately ended in complete failure. Exhausted and in pain, their hopes were utterly dashed, leaving them with nothing but endless resentment and frustration. Under the cover of night, this group of battered intruders could only retreat in a panic, fleeing in disarray. A moment of greed ultimately brought them nothing but wounds all over their bodies. After the disastrous defeat of their nighttime assault, everyone was exhausted and disheveled, nursing minor injuries. Not only did they fail to seize any supplies, but they also wasted what little strength they had left. In a desperate situation, the loss of physical strength means getting one step closer to death. The pent-up resentment finally erupted. On the way back, the group of neighbors completely tore off their masks. They blamed each other and complained among themselves. Some blamed Bai Lian, the leader, for poor planning, while others complained that their companions didn't put in enough effort. Infighting and arguments broke out continuously, and the once united group instantly fell apart. Facing everyone's accusations, Bai Lian felt no guilt at all. She kept shirking responsibility, constantly blaming her teammates for being too clumsy and lacking strength, unable to break through the simple wall, attributing all the reasons for their failure to others. Chen Feng, her selfish co-conspirator, feared being implicated as things spiraled. Amidst the chaos, he quietly slipped away to save himself. With the leader shirking duty and members fleeing in suspicion, the raiding party collapsed. Watching their infighting on camera, I felt a deep sense of clarity. Disaster breeds only selfishness and suspicion, never true companionship. In chaos, selfish alliances lead to ruin. The days-long siege finally ended. Weakened neighbors could no longer unite for an assault. Each struggled alone, bringing brief stability. To restock supplies, I geared up and briefly left the fortress to scavenge. Outdoors, the heat was unbearable amidst swirling sand. Streets were silent, showing only ruin and a lifeless city. The survivors I passed stumbled along, barely surviving. Turning a corner, I found a mother and daughter. The mother was emaciated and parched. The child in her arms cried weakly. They had been without food for days, desperate and defenseless. Having experienced betrayal, I was no longer soft-hearted. I knew that in chaotic times, saints don't survive. But looking at the helpless child, a shred of humanity remained. After a brief hesitation, I put down a few bottles of drinking water and some compressed food, making sure not to get close or leave any trace. Seeing their joyful surprise, I walked away. My mind was clear. I won't overextend my kindness or save others at will. I won't waste resources on the greedy, but I also won't extinguish my humanity. I whispered to myself, I won't save people recklessly, but I won't lose my conscience either. Staying true to myself means holding my line. Indifference preserves me, but doesn't excuse doing evil. As the apocalypse escalated, city chaos worsened. Scattered survivors realized that it was hard to survive alone, so they began to band together spontaneously. Across the city, survivor strongholds emerged. The strong gathered followers, seized water and supplies, and monopolized scarce resources. Weaker survivors had to rely on the strong, becoming low-tier subjects under their command. The law of the jungle and survival of the fittest became the established rules of the apocalypse. Major strongholds fought and plundered each other in order to seize the limited water and supplies. The situation in the city grew ever more chaotic. There were no rules, no morals, only the most primitive struggle for survival. Compared to the scattered, petty scheming of neighbors, established survivor strongholds had manpower, organization, and strategy, making them exponentially more threatening. They were no longer a disorganized rabble, but rather fully formed predatory forces in a world of chaos. Watching the surveillance footage of the major strongholds fighting and carving up territory, I grew increasingly wary. The attacks from mutant beasts were merely external disasters. It was human greed and the struggle for power that were the deadliest man-made calamities of the apocalypse. I warned myself in a low voice, it's not just the mutant beasts, human nature is the greatest hidden danger, and an even bigger crisis is approaching. With the scattered crises coming to an end and the power struggles beginning, the real battles have only just started. After the major survivor strongholds in the city stabilized their territories, they began searching everywhere for high-quality resource sites to expand their own spheres of influence. The entire city was in ruins, except for my small courtyard, which remained completely intact, fully fortified, and had seen no visitors for years, making it stand out as particularly unusual. The largest armed survivor stronghold in the area soon took notice of my hidden courtyard. The stronghold sent out scouts to investigate and gather information, aiming to get a clear understanding of the small courtyard situation. After completing their investigation, the scouts returned to the stronghold and reported that the courtyard was well fortified, had seen no one enter or leave for years, and most likely contained a vast amount of supplies. In a ruined and desolate city, an intact courtyard represents endless resources and vitality. The stronghold leader was ambitious and urgently needed a large amount of supplies to support his followers and expand his power. Upon hearing the news, he immediately decided to make my fortress the target for plundering. The leader gave a stern order to lock onto the target and set out as soon as they were ready. A powerful armed force had officially set its sights on my underground fortress. Compared to the scattered neighbors, this organized, well-equipped, and numerous stronghold faction was far more powerful and posed a much greater threat. A massive siege was brewing as a deadly crisis drew near. The city was a purgatory. Bai Lian, Chen Feng, and their group, now lowly refugees, struggled daily against heat, hunger, and beasts, barely surviving. They blamed all their misfortunes on me, and the resentment and jealousy in their hearts grew ever stronger. Meanwhile, the mutated beast populations in the wild continued to grow stronger, expanding their territory and gradually advancing toward the city center. In the streets and alleys, sightings of mutant beasts became increasingly frequent. The dangers on the surface kept escalating, and the threat of natural disasters grew ever greater, but the most deadly threat was man-made disaster. Major survivor groups gathered outside, armed and ready to march on my hidden courtyard, the city's last intact spot. They planned to breach my fortress and seize my stockpiled resources. Crises converged from all sides. Disasters, mutants, and armed factions closed in. My underground fortress was an isolated island in the chaos. I sat alone before the surveillance screens, watching the threats close in. My expression remained composed. No panic, no fear. I slowly gripped the cold weapon at my side, ready to face every enemy. The scorched earth apocalypse had only just begun. I managed to hold on to a brief moment of peace, but I could not stop the greed of human nature or the encroachment of mutant beasts. The enemies outside grew stronger with each wave. How long could my underground fortress really hold out?